Hello, and welcome to Dr. Deep State. Today's topic is my reflections upon U.S. education. You probably guessed it has a little bit to do with the idea of sort of a factory model of education. That's a bit of what I'm up to. I want to say hi to some of my new subscribers. I'm happy to have you uh, along with me. Um, I'm going to finish this lecture as I'm beginning it with this idea that we seem to be coming upon the possibility of some new YouTube censoring. So that's kind of where I'm ultimately going with this. So as I'm speaking about that, if anything happens with my channel and you would like to continue watching me on some kind of format, I would intend to put it on something related to seeing through the singularity, and making that book available there that hopefully is going to be out in less than 1 month. So, seeing through the singularity. People have been reminding me lately that I should back up some of my material, and I'm just terrible at this. I record on this cheapy little pad, and I have to flip around and do videos constantly because I have almost no memory left. And I really should probably, you know, get a new computer. But I have every intention to saving it as as soon as I can. But thank you for reminding me, and it's really something I need to do. I have nothing saved. So I need to do that. Let's start with this. I'm going to speak about a little bit of the evolution or devolution of American education. And I guess I need to kind of explain some of my own experiences to begin that. What I'm going to be talking about could be a story in any country, but I'm going to situate it in the Americas for a couple of reasons I'm about to explain, and also because that's my experience. Um, so I need to describe a little bit about my education, just a little bit, and then my teaching experience, so that you can kind of get a handle on the perspective that I have. First of all, I have a couple advanced degrees, and I'll tell you about that. I, as a student, struggled um, in early elementary school. I struggled again when I entered college, and I struggled again when I was a graduate student. So I've always had this sense of struggle with whatever I accomplished. I went to a nice private school in the upper Midwest. It was a liberal arts school. I have a degree from Boston and one from New York. One's a master's and one's a PhD. And I have a degree that's an Ivy League degree. And before you go thinking that I'm real fancy, I'm kind of unique. I had to work my way through that. I even had the opportunity to go abroad and study medieval and Renaissance studies over there in Oxford and travel all around and have these life experiences. But this was never easy for me. I always had to get up and get knocked back. I had to pay my way through almost all of it. And by the time I finally got my PhD, I truly the Rocky of the world of education. I was going through Fifth Avenue in New York City, floating, but I mean, it was years of just being battered up, but I made it. And I got some great education opportunities as far as teaching. I've been able to teach in the West Coast, East Coast, South, Northeast, the whole shebang at some really nice institutions. So I do have this multiple perspective on, the demographics of America and some of the differences, and faculty all over, and some of those variations that happen. So I just wanted to paint a little bit of that picture. I also, what I would key in on is I also had an opportunity as a student to do a great deal of liberal arts, history, economics. I eventually settled in for my advanced degrees, political science, but broadly speaking, political philosophy and international relations and international law. So I would top this all off before I begin of all the stuff I learned over the years. I'm not just saying this. The most important learning I did separate from school and on my own. Okay, so let's begin here with a little bit about the American experiment. The American experiment. And we've heard that expression before. And I think I could be talking broadly on so many different nations and different experiences in education. But America was a type of experiment. And I would say, to focus in on one point, I think it would be the idea that it would be different from other nations, in particular, separate from the way Europe had kind of evolved. And I think what's key here when we look at the US Constitution is the idea that there's no king and no established church. Those the sort of the glue that would hold other nations together was here. And there are books on like to build a nation. If you could really build a nation that's a group of people with like-minded experiences and pasts and so forth, can we? This is an experiment. Can we sort of build that sense of national identity? Um, and the idea would be there would be, again, no king, no self government. So, what is going to hang this thing together? Well, one would be these people are involved in an experiment of self government. The unfortunate part is when you take people from their roots, you kind of leave them free flowing. And the idea would we end up, kind of creating in this country a sort of atomized individual, separate from any kind of historical roots or people or lineage or bloodline. And so, with that experiment, the idea that we wouldn't have an actual culture in the way everybody else gets to have one, but we'd have a political culture. And of course, there's a lot of pluses and minuses involved with this idea, but through the principles of the Declaration of Independence, the principles embedded in the US Constitution, intertwined with our own experience, that we would have these notions of a free people. And it's quite a fascinating idea, embedded in liberty. A quick reflection on how that worked in the 19th century. By and large, there were very, very few what we would call colleges or even high schools. Many people learned at home. Many people learned through very primary sources like Shakespeare and the Bible and the U.S. Constitution and they actually read these things. It's been calculated. I can make reference to a Ken Burns. I know it's a shaky reference. Way back in his Civil War series, he had kind of looked at sources that counted the diaries and information from the Civil War era and calculated that the reading level of people during the Civil War was 50,000 words. At the time that he made that in 1990, I believe it was down to 10,000. Some people estimate that the U.S. vocabulary is down to 8. But I see other sources out there that are kind of getting rid of that information, saying we're between 10 and 20. So it's a little bit debatable, but there's been a rapid decimation of our ability to think and comprehend and speak the English language. But there's the old sort of prairie on one side, and we have I think that's a I'll call it a Catholic school. So one looks a little high end and one looks very, very common. Well, I'll get to this in a moment, but the experience would be kind of neat. One person on a very limited budget would, do K through whatever, 8 or maybe even higher, and the kids would be part of the learning process. And it seems kind of idyllic. And, I don't want to over idealize this, but, around the turn of the century, that's just to give you some idea of what a newspaper looks like. And I'm sure you've seen these old these old newspapers before. Not a lot of pictures, but we have a lot of information. Just a little sketch of, at the turn of the century, I'm talking about the turn of the last century, what some of the popular books were that students would read. And you can only imagine, instead of being on your smartphone or watching television, to be reading, these great orations or Shakespeare, or the classics of English 19th century literature, how that would form such an impression. And of course, each one of these words is an insight and an intimation into, an advancement of your perception and different subtleties of so forth of the language. So, so there you go with that. Here, notice again, here's where I'm going to kind of go. I'm not driving with this lecture too much about, quote unquote, being waken up, because, that's kind of the difficulty. A lot of what we learn in school is maybe not even accurate. Okay. So, that's a problem. And frankly, if I had to do it over again today, I wouldn't do almost any of it. I don't know what I'd do. but I wouldn't sit there in a classroom and listen to so much of this information that comes out. A question I sometimes ask students, and where I'm getting a gauge for me being woken up, has some kind of insight into the fact that there's the old left-right paradigm or the dialectic, and that you can kind of see beyond that, or even, and it's tricky for people that have never heard the information. So one way I'll ask students, because in the popular polarized culture that media pushes today, we get this idea that there's these great differences between the Republicans and Democrats, the right and the left, usually these little culture war kind of things, and our buttons are being pushed, and so on and so forth. And so I'll ask students, one of my breakdowns, think of policies in which, and invariably they can come up with almost nothing. And then I'll show this right here, what I call the Washington Consensus. And in short, all those policies, nobody's ever actually heard of them. These are the policies that make or break a country. There's been a complete consensus on these, and we can essentially say this is globalism being rolled out. So both parties, you're going to kind of get, no, not kind of, you're going to absolutely get that same direction, at least since World War II and the creation of the modern uh, hegemonic system under American control that we have. So, but if we back up just for a moment to, the New York Times, the late 19th, early 20th century, they would be reading about and discussing those issues. Farmers, construction workers, common people, even would be not just the enlightened. But today, you could show this, unless it's maybe a class in international relations, nobody's really heard about this or really thought through these policies. And so before I began, a couple books that I've enjoyed, I think are valuable. If this is sort of new kind of information to you, I'm sure many have kind of heard of these ideas before. The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America by Charlotte Iserby. Excellent. And John Gatto, American Education, the History of the Underground Education, and the couple over there about the change in how we read font. It gets you kind of thinking about where we were and how we got to where we are. So with these books, in addition to Anton Sutton, you get this idea that there's going to be a new sort of factory model of education. Here, the apt quote, and I'm sure many have heard this before: I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers. And I think this harkens back, even a century before this, to the beginning of the 19th century and sort of the Prussian model of education. And of course, as the story goes, Prussians weren't doing very well in the battlefield. Their officers were people that kind of came out of, I guess, officer training or elite education at the time, a liberal arts education. And they found they were far too reflective and thoughtful. And so from kindergarten up, they created this system based on complete deference to authority. When somebody says jump, you say how high, don't question, so that when you're in the battlefield or you're in the corporation, you follow orders. So you kind of keep it very simple. Teach. You need to teach. They need to be able to, screw on a bolt and X, Y, and Z else. But all the kind of ideas, i.e. critical thinking, things that make you an individual, a creative a person, we'd sort of slowly start slicing that out of what we learn. And what we did learn in the late 19th century is the power of the media, that is newspapers, as they sort of started to get bought up by the likes of Pulitzer and Hearst, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, and kind of buying all the independent, smaller voices and nationalizing the press, that they could sell a war, even a war that's as unpopular. And again, the frame of the people in the 19th century, we're a republic. We don't get involved in foreign entanglements. Um, so it was quite a feat, and it was really an experiment in what you could do with media, getting all the right bells and whistles and colors, and introducing people to entertainment for at least a bit, and just kind of exploiting their trust in government. And you can see that was kind of manufactured or built up, this idea of entering people into the Spanish American War. And so in media studies, it's pretty common that it was a huge variable in terms of selling this war. And, very dramatic. You can see there bald-faced lies involved in the reporting. Some have likened that type of sensational journalism or yellow journalism. It still goes on today um, in our press, with our media, with the cabal, the powers between the two. But the outcome that Rockefeller would come up with is this idea that we had to change the system. Um, During the reform era, and I'm thinking about more like a little bit after this Spanish American War, the media started getting really critical, the famous muckraking period, and looking at the um, forces, high economic and high political forces, kind of that were cooperating in cahoots with one another. The money bags that came out of the railroad industry, the names we know so well, the DuPonts, the Morgans, the Pullmans, the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, etc. Um, the idea was very much out there and alive in the press that these people have usurped our government. And that, there was a period in the media where regular people were reading stories about the exploitations of these new corporations and what they were willing to do, even to children, or what they were willing to do in terms of producing, our food for us. So it was a period where your average farmer kind of guy was really aware that there was sort of these New York banker types that had some connections with other international banker types. And of course, this is sort of the period where you get the literature about the elders and the Zion and all that. And people, that was in the air, and people were kind of hip to that. And people in my grandparents' generation that remembered that when they'd kind of bring these things up, when I was a kid, everybody'd kind of look at them, that they're odd. But it's not until I'm much older that you realize that they had been exposed to information that we are no longer exposed to. So let's return to 1920 and Churchill, where we were last time. And he's describing this conspiracy, a great conspiracy that's going on. First, he makes, my favorite little thing. He's saying that it seems like part of what's going on in the world, it would almost seem as if the gospel of Christ and the gospel of Antichrist were destined to originate among the same people. So that idea was out there. Right now, it's a dangerous thing just to repeat what he was saying, but that idea was out there, that really you can go back to Christ's ministry and kind of rethink what's going on there. But let me read from Churchill. This is 1920. This worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development, of the envious malevolence and impossible equality, has been steadily growing. So let's think about arrested development. So as as Churchill said, this is a worldwide conspiracy. I think many of the techniques for how they were going to go about arresting the development of the masses would be through the Tavistock Institute over there in the UK. And a lot of that would be based on behavioral science that had been studied for a few decades. A great book, you can get it on PDF, The Leibniz Connection, that's going to talk about want and the behavioralists that he produced that would go both to Europe and America using, of course, these Pavlovian type of experiments that they done on human beings. They equated human beings with animals and researched them in that way and tried to figure out how they could make human beings more manageable by carrot and stick, rewards and threat and coercion. So they were going to apply these techniques, of course, pretty much to all of our institutions, but especially to education. So one of the things you want to do is just make sure the state is going to be in control of that more than the family. So we're going to switch that model around. We're going to keep kids in school longer and longer and longer. And of course, part of arresting their development is ironically keeping them in this institutionalized setting for, by the time they're 18, a good at least third of their life in this institutionalized setting, for better or worse. So arrested development, some of these ideas are also a kind of a fusion of behavioralism and Freudism. Lethal cocktail of both. Liberation, again, always just creaking in there every decade a little bit more. I'd mentioned way back that one of the techniques oligarchs use for control is, first of all, you do want to deracitate the individual, break them from their roots and their past. But another technique is abstraction. You want to, kind of anything that's kind of black and white, you want to break that down, relativize reality. And you can see the 20th century, the burst of modern art, modern architecture, modern poetry, modern music, that all of these things were truly weaponized and used against the masses. Not that every last book or film or piece of music was terrible, but by and large, I think when we know that there was a conspiracy against humanity, and you do look at modern paintings for one, or modern poetry with a more critical eye, you can kind of see the game that you don't get it, that the kind of game, right? That went on in higher education, and you just kind of started at the fanciest of schools and let the trickle down effect happen. And of course, sexual liberation, nothing needs to be said about that, right? Entertainment, I don't know what to say. It's kind of obvious, like just decade by decade, hook people on more and more electronic information versus reading, infotainment, until the point where the reading level, and I'll get to that in a moment, is just so freaking low. But more importantly, and Tuckville would talk about this, the desire to have a free thought or to even investigate or even be curious is taken from you in the first place. And that's the real, sad part of all this. Because that's what truly makes us human, is our ability to have an individual thought and to question the world that we live in. And the idea, over 100 years ago, part of this conspiracy would be just multiple distractions, both, in entertainment and in leisure. And when the ideas were proposed around the turn of the century, we're going to have these Roman-style coliseums, and we're going to fill them up with these things you've just barely heard about called sports. And of course, early on, the idea that you're going to get adults to pay $5, much less, $250 to go in there and watch other grown men run around chasing a ball would have been absurd. It kind of had to be incremental in terms of getting people hooked on sports and placing so much of their own individual identity on sporting teams. And, that's the subject I think you're familiar with. So it really is the dumbing down of America. And as Tuckville noted, what was going on in America would be spread throughout the world. So we can come up with a number of policy puzzles at this point in America. I think it took a while for this complete inversion of reality to take place. Again, it's a process, but we're at a place right now where the president of the United States can um, speak about this accomplishment. He has made the greatest economy in human history. And other people are coming to him and saying, how did you do it? How did you make? And of course, at the same time, if you're familiar with the Washington consensus and those kind of ideas, he really hasn't done anything different from the last presidents over the last 100 years. Um, 23, $24 trillion, at least officially, debt. Most Americans just grinding away, barely, living off the credit card. And visually, if you want to live in this kind of dream world that's been created, you could see that we do drive relatively nice vehicles here in America, and that we do have a leisure life that still quite nice, actually, for most Americans. They have a sort of leisure life, but it's just barely hanging together, right? So anyway, there are a lot of puzzles. How at one time it could seem like we have the greatest economy in human history, but once you just kind of flip the page there, you can see that we're on the brink of disaster, and it introduces us to all kinds of policy puzzles that are probably not unique to America, but a couple of them are. We pay more in taxes than ever before, and we seem to get fewer and fewer services. Whatever we want to try to fight, whether it's obesity or literacy, or higher scores and so forth, everything seems to have the inverse effect. You spend more and more and more, and you get less and less and less and less. And of course, the great problem that we're getting to in America is the lack of mobility. Housing is almost prohibitively expensive right now, buying a house, and the price of education has gone up nearly 300% in the last 20 to 30 years. So those things that really are indicators of mobility are down to almost nil. And so it's also a question for education. What are we getting out of our modern education? And we'll think about that in a moment. But one thing we don't, what I'm kind of driving at here is I think critical thinking is at an all-time low. We're, of course, in the universities given an accidental view of history. One president just accidentally gets in there instead of the other, and things just kind of flip one after another, willy-nilly, just the same way the evolution model works. And to kind of see through that is danger zone in terms of speech. But like Tuckville said, you might even go there in the first place. That's kind of the brilliance of what's been created for us. Don't question the institution. You're invited, if you're on the left, you can criticize the right and right versa. But once you start seeing the hand holding, the hand above both, you can't go there. So you can't question the institutions of government anymore. When I was younger, I think you certainly could, and that was part of what we did in college. But I've noticed people simply don't do it or have the capacity to do that anymore. You just repeat, we are democracy. And I hold up books, with the flag, and we the people. And I try to tell students, like, these just from the textbook, real common stuff. So incumbency, if you already got the job and you're running for it, it's gotten so high of late. It's up to 96, 97% of the people that have the job want it. Okay, well, what about satisfaction with Congress or satisfaction with key political things? Well, it's at an all-time low, down to 8 and even 5%. So if you ask in a survey 100 Americans, it's as low as 5% will say they're happy with Congress. So that's a puzzle. Okay, if we don't like Congress, but they all keep their jobs, where's the democracy? And then, of course, you introduce, if you're not familiar with this, the Citizens United decision of 2010. And legally, it's been legitimized. This is truly a system about government. Again, you don't have to go and start talking about the Federal Reserve, but you get that look when you do this. You get that look, just like the Washington consensus. Well, why are they not talking about these issues in a public debate? Why are they? Why is it not on the news? why are you the only person saying that? So cognitive dissonance, I see that they don't know what to do with it. And um, they're just excited to get back on their cell phone, their first chance they get. So we truly live in a sort of education matrix, starts in K and can end on postdoctoral studies if somebody's nuts enough to go that far. And it's definitely an institutional mode that's been fine tuned over the decades. And I think what you, in short, get from this over the years, it's taking your very common sense that there is such a thing as truth. This idea that 2 + 2 = 4. And it's just stripping almost everything away. So it's a world of, oh, who's to say? Who's to say? And again, that's abstraction. When you're in that mode, you're malleable to the people that do know. If you don't have a core and a place to stand and a history and some definitive concepts of how the universe works, and I would argue, as Fogelin would say, the being, your connection to a hierarchy of being, and the transcendental nature of it. If you don't kind of have that grounding, you could really be seduced by what you're hearing. More education equals more critical thinking. I'll get to that in a moment. I, if you go out and, well, if you look online at people that are thinking, I don't think more education equals people that are truly independently thinking. I think that tops out at a certain level after reading and writing is kind of in place. Um, and success equals whatever I guess the institutions call success. If it's a corporate model of education, it's probably going to be what a corporation would define as success. And of course, the epitome of this system in America, the envy of the world, is the Ivy League and the sort of prestige that's been put upon that. And again, everything sort of trickles down, and we're sort of just supposed to kind of, these are sort of the deities of the system. The demigods come out of there, and we of course give such an insane amount of deference to these things. But again, I don't know the last time anybody's kind of looked at just an honest conversation, trying to investigate truth and what's going on in our world, or even just basically just look at news coverage and say, this doesn't make sense. I don't know if anybody, to my knowledge, from the Ivy Leagues is out there doing that. You would think, I mean, they're got to be teaching some truth in religion departments, you would think, or philosophy departments, or certainly, and I think where you maybe get a little bit of it is in architecture and engineering. I mean, these were the people, after all, from some good schools that came out after 9/11 and formed an association. And it's, I think, the only barrier, and that's what the communists always had to deal with, because they had to make people strong, smart enough to build stuff. But at the same time, that gives them a critical capacity to say, what you're telling me does not square with 2 + 2 = 4. So people always have that capacity. That's always been a problem for these regimes that want to make complete puppets, is that they do have to kind of have some sense of originality left in the individual, and some sense of how to construct things. So let's go a little bit about, I wanted to look briefly here at some concepts about early 20th century education. And I do recommend Gatto's work, The Underground History of Education. I enjoy, it's been quite a few years since I've read it. The schoolhouse there, the Little Red Schoolhouse, he points out, I think, just how quaint it was. And you're really helping the teacher. The fourth graders were helping the third graders. And there was this kind of this sense of community there. And, maybe we're idealizing a little bit. But the goal was to go from there into the sort of Darwinian model of separating people by grades and by classes. And one of the things you get from it, if you experience this industrial education, is, because I've just asked over the years people, very few people enjoy it. And that's the point that Gatto made, is that it's not fun. And learning can be fun. And he demonstrates how he made it fun by breaking the model. And kids truly are creative, and they want to be inquisitive and curious, but it's just sucked out of them in this model of education. It really just just frankly takes the soul from you, and zaps you, and modern lingo zombifies you. Look at this, and I've showed my college students this any number of times at different universities. This is what you're expected to know when you graduated eighth grade. Some people had gone to high school, but back then this would be like a pretty decent education. And so in the state of Washington, this is just kind of a basic template of what you'd be expected to know after eighth grade. And grammar, I've shown that that doesn't look that difficult, but my students can't do it. They don't get the question. It's not multiple choice. What are they asking you? They start to break down. It's asking you to think. Um, but my favorite here, again, America is supposed to be based on this idea that our new culture is supposed to be a political culture. So this was taken seriously in the 19th and early 20th centuries. You were literally taught the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the principles behind that. But more importantly, you're taught civics, geography, and history. And this, in my teaching experience, I just know that every year people are just prideful of not knowing history, like it's so unimportant. And I have students now doing exercises. This is college now. At the beginning of the semester, you got 20 lines on your paper. Each one's a decade. Pick one individual or one event from each one of the decades. And they can, I mean, and I say, even if you have to, just fill in a rap video. But even the rap videos, I think they have trouble. Was that the 90s? And I mean, you get almost nothing. I do the maps, you have to fill it out, and you have to fill up a map of your own country. And so this is, where I'm kind of going. That's a new thing that has gone to that level. Um, but look at this. They actually had a political culture, I think, that they understood. And I show my students that are, especially the ones in the past that were majoring in political science, and they will readily admit, I don't know that stuff now. you know and so this is shocking kind of stuff, and this is, of course, part of the conspiracy to again deracitate you, strip you more from your roots, your past, and even your political past is going to be taken from you. And um, geography, again, that's the world. You would know the world in eighth grade. You'd know your own political past, and you'd know the world. And that was kids had fun with it. They enjoyed it. You can make geography fun. And let me tell you, this is where Americans rank. By something happens today by eighth grade, that American students in geography fall below. I mean, some of the poorest countries in the world fare better in geography than American students, and it's kind of a shame. Arithmetic. Sometimes I think Americans, maybe it's not that bad here, because again, we have to have people. You have to build stuff, you have to be able to get your tape measure out and do some basics. So I don't think we've been stripped of that. But look at the reading list, and this is what's shocking. Again, great classic 19th century novels, poems. And this is just a reading list for a common school in the 19th and even into the early 20th century. High school and especially college, if you were considered quote unquote educated, you had steeped yourself to some extent, depending, in ancient Greek and ancient Latin, as a gentleman would in the UK. And these were sources that you drew from. And that would be supplanted in the 20th century with Catcher in the Rye. And of course, in my generation, kids had fun with it and enjoyed that book. I'll get to this in a moment, but you simply can't get, it's tough to get somebody to read a book. They don't read anymore. I'll get to that. And part of where I'm going with that is, the combination of Dewey, who we celebrate, it's just it's the self-proclaimed socialist. And that's another thing. Kids, nobody can get this. Instructors can't get this. Why are the super rich so interested in socialism? Haven't you ever really asked that question? But Rockefeller and Dewey, the socialists, would get together and create a new system of education. It's progressive, right? We're progressing towards something. What are we progressing toward? So socialization, subjectivity, and new methods of learning. So starting with the ground up in kindergarten, and here, this method of this whole world, I was really a victim of this. Some kids seem to pick it up, but I did not. I was a little late. It took me a few years in elementary. It was really damaging to me. Um, and when they introduced the Dick and Jane books, the scores plummeted. And so you got to wonder, so why did you keep the books around if the scores were plummeting? Um, as we know, because there was an agenda. And, you get into the more popular debate today, whether it's No Child Left Behind, which should just strike you as an inversion of a classical, not being rewarded. Certainly, I don't think we need to put dunce caps on kids in the rooms anymore. But I think you're going to focus on your best and your brightest. Try as best as you can to pull them up. But I think what we know is that you try to when you set the bar and raise it up, everybody tends to follow. But when your focus is at the bottom, that's where it's going to go. And that's just plain common sense. And I'm not going to make much of a comment about Common Core. And we just tend to get more of the same. The numbers don't work, but we keep it out. Teachers don't really like teachers don't like this stuff, but we just keep rolling it out, spending more and more and more. And of course, one of the questions today that we could ask, is college worth it? And that's a whole subject in itself. And I think it's a difficult subject. When I went through college way back when, you're kind of guaranteed a job. And today the numbers, you're getting as much as 300% increases over education. Of course, most of that's not going to the instructors, but for all the amenities and so forth. And the numbers aren't adding up. People aren't getting jobs in their major. I think as many as half aren't even getting college jobs when they leave. So it's a dilemma. And apparently we have leaders of industry now telling us the jobs of the future. It's not about your formal education, but about what you're sort of able to do on the job for the company. So it's interesting times that we're living in. So let me finish with this. This is an exercise I had this week, and this is sort of what prompted this. I asked students 3 questions: what, why. So what are you looking at? Why is it happening? And if you're having trouble reading the middle, that's the more education you have, you tend to read books more, or I'm assuming research is maybe piled up that, but books. And older people on the final one there read more than younger people. But in all cases, the numbers are kind of dropping. So that's not very tricky. The what and the why, I don't even think students quite picked up on, because they don't know. I mean, all they know is smartphones. So they've never seen the change that smartphones don't make you smarter, that all the evidence, we used to hear about the digital divide and the rich kids are going to get the computers. No, quite the contrary. What we know now is that, the Google executives out there in California send their kids to schools where they cannot have their smartphones. So they know something. That computers and smartphones and smart rooms of instruction, frankly, and instructors like those smart rooms and students like it, the scores go down and down and down. But here's what kind of scared me. I wanted them to do a cost benefit of what would you do taking some of your Netflix time or your video time over there and instead read a book from 1 to 2, 3 hours a week. Well, the first class I did it, go and do research that kind of took the stories from television, the news stories, and kind of, I suggested researching it. I didn't say challenge the story. I said go and research it. And so when they did their cost benefit on each side, the advantages of going and doing extra time, I invariably got fake news. They're not going to go on the computer and because the computer's where you get fake news. So who's to know? And I would say to people, no, you can do anything, research gardening, research something about your car, just do research, just kind of engage yourself in something outside the television. And again, the look, you get the look. So the next class, I just wanted them to go to the library. Of course, what you're going to get because then there's a cost of going to the library and who does that anymore and everything's online. But with the final few classes, what I did is just reading. Could you see yourself substituting 1 to 3 hours of your entertainment time and reading? And the response was like, why would I want to do that? And I mean, you were getting things like books are in past tense, the television's now. I can't change the channel on a book. And to a student, they hate reading. They hate reading. They hate reading. They just hate it. My best students hate reading, and they will admit I do not read books, and I only read something if I have to for an assignment. So the cost benefit analysis, essentially research, critical thinking is now equal to, I mean, this meme that they pumped out a few years back really worked. And that's what scares me. Research and reading. And I said, like, when I just, no, read, just read. Somehow it was that effective that reading equals fake news. I never thought I'd get that. But it's an excuse to not read. It might, it's really, what do you say? So that's where I was, beginning this about, I don't know, I just hear things, December, new rules coming down on the internet, and, it may or may not be anything. But for me to finish this, I know I've gauged my students. If they found out the only news they could get was from the radio and the television, and that this had somehow been replaced because somehow. So the world has been primed for this moment. It wasn't that many years ago that going and doing research on the internet meant you're kind of on the ball. You're a curious person. You're looking for some extra information, and in a heartbeat, that whole Pizzagate moment with fake news, it stuck. And I think, the social scientists, the Tavistock kind of people in the background had done their experiments, and that will stick, that fake news meme. And if in the near future we were, informed that a whole was taken down because of, inappropriate material or so forth, from my experience with my students, it would just not faze them. Well, Google made that decision and they don't like what you're doing. And it wouldn't kind of be in their mind like, what kind of business model is that these people are creating content and bringing viewers? And, I don't think that would get there. So students would be completely unfazed. Most Americans, again, through this process of indoctrination through our education system and through our media, are going to be unfazed. They like the mass news outlets, the mainstream news outlets, and they would probably say, "Good." They've been trained through, uh, so many mechanisms of humor and everything else to they'd laugh at people that do this, right? It's funny to them. It's kind of a joke. I mean, I know this, right? Because I do this. you know, it's not valued. It's not valued anywhere. So here's the scary part to finish. What would faculty think? These people that we were reared in this kind of First Amendment culture of free speech and free expression, and our founding fathers, the framers, like Madison in particular, said a free society means free information. So how are you getting freer by eliminating alternative views? How are we moving ahead? And so I'm getting beyond my students and thinking about faculty and Americans. They just aren't picking this up. And so I think that's the whole thing with when or if this kind of platform is eliminated. It's going to be done when the public is ready for it. So that's kind of where I'm going again. If my platform should disappear, I'm going to try to construct something called Seeing Through the Singularity so I can speak to y'all. And if nothing else, please just remember Seeing Through the Singularity as the title of the book that's going to be coming out shortly. So I've enjoyed discussing this material with you. If any of this was new to you, I hope that it encouraged you to kind of cherish the freedom of thought that you do have and your own capacity to think independently. And so I hope this has kind of encouraged you to value your own independent thinking and to cherish what you do have and to guard it. And that's what I got for you. So thank you, everybody, for being with me today. I hope you all have a blessed week. And I'm saying goodbye. This is Dr. Deep State.